Good morning, good afternoon or good evening, wherever in the world you might be watching. This video is designed to assist you to pass an advanced Excel job test, either with a prospective employer or a job agency. It contains a number of advanced situations, the first of which you will surely be tested on, pivot tables. Pivot tables are easily constructed and allow the presentation of data in different ways. In the data that you see here, the first rule is to ensure that there are no blank rows or blank columns. Then simply click on any cell in the data and choose Insert Pivot Table. Accept the defaults and click OK. Notice that by default the pivot table will be placed in a new worksheet. We will rename that worksheet shortly and call it PT1. So when I click OK, there is my pivot table with the pivot table field list over on the right. Now let's rename this sheet. Right click, rename. And we'll call it PT1. And press enter. Now it's simply a matter of dragging fields into the quadrant that we will see on the right. At the moment I don't see the pivot table field list because I've clicked outside of the pivot table, but if I click back in the pivot table then I see the field list. So remember that, outside the field list, no field list. Back in the pivot table we see the field list. Now we can populate the pivot table itself by simply dragging fields down into where we want them in the quadrant below. I'm going to put the last names down into the rows and I see my pivot table begins to be constructed. The department I'll put in the columns, and the values area is reserved for those fields which contain numbers. In this case it'll be salary. So there is my pivot table over here on the left. Now it's time for us to conduct some tests on the pivot table. And the first thing we're going to do is to increase Gregory Cook's salary to $35,000 and have it reflect in the pivot table. Now bear in mind I cannot change numbers in the pivot table. What I have to do is go back to the data and change the number there. So in Gregory Cook's case, we want to make him 35,000 and press enter. Now if we go back to the pivot table, he's still here at 26,000. So what I need to do is to click in the pivot table, and then in the Analyze group, I see the Refresh button. Click Refresh, and there his salary has changed to 35,000. So remember that rule, you cannot change numbers in the pivot table, you change the numbers in the data and then refresh the pivot table. The next test is to use a filter to show the IT department personnel only. So what I'm going to do here, they're in the columns, so I click the filter for the column labels, unselect all and simply choose IT. And when I click OK, I only see those people who are in the IT department. The next test is to show the average salary of IT personnel. I do this by right-clicking on any cell in the pivot table and go down to Summarise Values By, and I can see that there are a number of values. In this case I want the average, so when I click average it changes the total or the average of the salaries in that particular cell there and also there. The next test is to remove the filter. So I click on the filter button, select all, click OK, and I'm back where I started. Next, I want to sort the last field in ascending order. So what I do, I click here and I say sort A to Z. And that is exactly what it has done there. Now with the pivot table field lists, the reason that it is called a pivot table is because we can pivot the fields around this centre point here. For example, if I wanted the department underneath the last names, then I can do that by simply dragging down and putting the field where I might prefer to see it. Similarly, I could put the last name up here in the columns, but I don't particularly like that. I'll put them back where they were, and I'll put the department back there, and that is how I can change the view of the pivot table. Now the next procedure that you'll be tested on is using the concatenate function. Concatenate simply means joining text together, and it works like this. I want the full name of the members of the departments, and I type equal concatenate and open a bracket. And the very first thing I want to do is to choose the cell that has the first name, B5 followed by a comma. Then I want a space. So in double quotes, I type a space and a comma. The next I want the middle name, comma, space between double quotes, comma, and finally I want the last name, followed by a closing bracket. And when I press enter, there I see Tom Robert Smith. What I can then do is to choose those cells and simply drag them down. And there is my list of full names using concatenate. If I wanted just with the middle initial, then if I click on this cell and look in the formula bar, I see that I have used concatenate and then B5 for Tom, followed by a space, and then I say left of C5 to get the leftmost letter in cell C5, followed by a comma, followed by a full stop between two double quotes, followed by a space, and then followed by A5. So that is how I use the left function embedded within concatenate just to show me the full stop. A little bit of practice involved, but it soon becomes second nature. Concatenate is certainly one of the easiest functions to use. You can expect to be tested on a more advanced if function, particularly where the if includes an embedded and this is how it works. So in this cell we're going to type a formula which will test if the department is IT and the salary is less than $45,000. So what we're going to do is type equal if, open a bracket, and then type and, because we need two tests to be true. And we're going to say if the department in H9 is equal to IT and a comma, and the salary is less than 45,000, we can close that bracket for the and, type a comma, and then in quotes the text that we want for our answers. So if they're both true, then say review salary. But if they're not true, then what we will do is to type a comma and no review. Close that, two double quotes, two brackets, I'm sorry. Yes. And here we will now see that if we fill that down, the only cell that has review salary, I've conditionally formatted that in red. So how did I do that? I clicked on all of those answers, and then in the Home tab, in conditional formatting, in the highlight cell rules, I simply said text that contains review salary. And when I clicked OK, it filled that with a light red. I could have said there, if the conditional formatting, if the text contains no review, then format the cells with yellow fill with dark yellow text. So that is how I could conditionally format the cells depending upon my answers. The next function that we'll look at is indirect. You may or may not be tested on this. However, it is very handy to know the features of this particular function. It's very valuable for finding the intersection of columns and rows. Now, the first thing we need to do is to make sure that we name the cells in the spreadsheet matrix, and we'll name these cells staff. And again, as you'll see, after I press enter to accept the name, I have drop downs here again for user-friendly situations. The key is to type in the as you'll see in the formula bar, two indirect functions. Equal indirect what is in L8, followed by a space, and then indirect what is in L9. So when I now click the enter key, I see that if I change the name here to say Smith, and I want to see Smith sales for February, I see 27,000, which is exactly what I see there. So indirect is a very quick and easy way, and quite easily learned, to find the intersection of rows and columns. Remember, the key is to name the cells first. The use of naming cells becomes handy and apparent when I see that I can type a formula using plain English instead of cell references. The first thing I'm going to do are to name two columns in this particular set of data, and I do that by clicking on the column heading to select the cells, and in this case I've called those cells over here in the name box department. Similarly, I called those cells salary. Now, to explain its usage, what I could do is in, say, this cell, is to type equal sum salary. When I press enter, there I see that the total of the salary cells is 291,750. Now, that's fine, that's just using one named set of cells. However, I can use a function called SUMIFS, which will enable me to use the criteria that I need to use, or that I want to use, to, as it were, filter out things that I don't want in my formula. So I'm going to go to the Math and Trig in the Formulas tab, and I'll scroll down until I come to SUMIFS. And the SUMIFS says, what's the sum range? Well, the sum range will be salary. That is, all the cells in column I. The criteria range, I want to use those numbers again. So I'll type salary. And the criteria, I want to see any salaries which are above 35,000. Greater than 35,000. Now the criteria range 2 is a department. And the criteria there is IT. And when I click OK, there is my answer, 86,000, because it's the total of that number and that number. Why? Because they are the only two numbers in the IT department that are greater than 35,000. So the criteria we can use in SUMIFS makes it very easy to segregate items, particularly if you have many names, salaries, departments, etc. That list could go down in the dozens. The last names could go down in the hundreds, as could the salaries. You may well be tested on the creation and use of macros. A macro is simply a set of commands which enable you to apply a number of commands to a cell with one click of a mouse. This is how it works. First of all, you need to be in the Developer tab, where you will see Record Macro. And the macro that we're going to record, we'll give it a name, call it formatting, because what we're going to do is to create a macro which will enable me to bold text, colour it red, 16 points, and centre aligned. Now, as soon as we click OK, I can assure you that everything you do will be recorded. So make sure you have practiced the commands that you want to use first. So when we click OK, I'm going to go to the Home tab and say bold, red, 16 points, and centre aligned. Now back in the Developer tab, I now click Stop Recording. And I now have a macro, which I can see if I click on macros. There is my formatting command there. Now, we could run the macro on these items here by clicking on an animal and choosing Run. However, what I suggest you might want to think about is this. In the Home tab, my apologies, in the Insert tab, insert a shape, which can be, for example, a rectangle. We'll insert a rectangle here, and when I release, I can type formatting. Make that a little wider to fit the G in. And now when I right-click on the button, I can assign a macro to that shape. And the macro will be formatting, and I'll click OK. Now what I'm going to do is to click on the cat and choose formatting. And as if by magic, the cat becomes bold, centre aligned, 16 points, and red. I can also do the same thing by selecting both the dog and the mouse, choose the formatting command, and there we are. So formatting in using a command is quite easily constructed, as we'll see, or as we've seen. So that is how you can pass your macro test in the job test that you will be performing. Last, but by no means least, is index with match. It's a powerful alternative to VLOOKUP. It's designed to find information in a set of data and has the ability to search from right to left, as opposed to VLOOKUP, which can only search for an answer from the first column and looks to the right. In this example, I've created drop-down lists for the month and the name of the person for user-friendly purposes, as we shall see. The steps to take are shown in the formula bar. So if I click on the cell with the formula, here in the formula bar, I see the typing of the formula. It starts off with index, equals index, and the cell range is the range of cells from G9 down to I14 which contain the answer that you want to see. That's followed by the first match function, which says what is in M8. That is, it looks for the name in M8, and the name is in the range F9 down to F14. Close your bracket and a comma, and the second match to find the intersection is what is in M9, that is the month, which is in G8 across to I8. The zeros tell Excel to find the first exact match for the data, and the list can be in any particular order. So that's how index and match work. A little bit of practice involved. You'll find that after a while it becomes second nature, and you'll more than likely be tested on the index match function in your job test. Thank you so much for watching. We would appreciate any likes or comments that you might care to have, and we wish you every success in your advanced Excel job test. See you next time. Bye for now.